What's up, hackers? Welcome to Chill Code. My name is Taggart, and tonight we're going to be doing some programming. We started this last week, and we were using kind of an interesting stack to create a front-end application that I'm pretty excited about. So we split it up into an API and a front-end, and so last week we were building the API, and then we got going using the front end, and then we kind of ran into some issues with the library we were using, which, welcome to JavaScript. But we got it sorted out at this point, and kind of want to go through what the front end looks like and how it works now that all the issues are sorted. See if we can switch it up to something a little bit easier to follow, listen to while we're working here. Yeah, that's not so bad. Okay. I'll just drop my volume down here. All right. So, what are we up to? Let's actually start back at the API. And let me bring up let me actually full screen this terminal here for a second, and kill this pane. And yeah, we'll just kill the listener, and we'll look at it here in the index.js. So this is our API, and the deal is that we have these lists of strategies for hackers. Right? Whenever you're stuck on a problem, I know it's happened to me a lot of times, you might want to have a way of looking at the problem in a different light. And I'm taking this inspiration for this project from Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies, which are kind of these weird inspirations for how to go at something creative, or in this case, a hacking problem from a completely different angle. I really like the way that those strategies work. And so basically what we're going to do is very simply create an API that randomly draws from either the red strategies or the blue strategies for red team and blue team and returns it. It's not that difficult. I'm not adding a whole lot of structure to it because honestly it doesn't need it. And then that's it. So we're using Express and Node.js to make this happen. So we're pulling in all of our requirements here. We have our files for the red cards and the blue cards. We are defining red and blue as constants so that we never have to retype this string. We just have it stored here. And then we load the decks, and that's what this load cards function does, is it just loads these up and turns it into an array that the JavaScript application can use. So when we call draw card, it returns a random card from the given deck, whatever deck it is. And so when we receive an API request, a GET request on the specific color, which we're using as a GET parameter here, we say, okay, in the case of red, we get red. And if we get blue, we get a blue card using draw card, and otherwise we say no such color found. That's pretty much all the API does, and let's fire it up and see it in action. So I'll fire up Node here, and let me open up a third window, and I'll just curl HTTP localhost API red and blue. So the API is working, which is great news. So that's it for the API, really. Now let's talk about the front end. Now the front end, its whole job is just to present an interface to the user. It doesn't really have to do anything server-side because the API is going to handle that. So for that reason, it's built entirely in JavaScript and HTML. And I used a couple of different fun libraries for this. I used, first of all, Parcel, which is a bundler for modern JavaScript. So basically what Parcel does is it takes any of your kind of JavaScript-like files or files that you would use in a modern web application, and no matter what your syntax preference is, whether you're using TypeScript, whether you're using Elm, whatever it is, Parcel will recognize it and do the correct transpiling so that at the end of the day, you have a working web application that you can publish to any web server without any trouble, without any preprocessors or anything, and get that running. And so there are other bundlers out there that do different levels of this. The reason I like Parcel is because it has such minimal configuration, right? Especially if you've ever worked with Webpack or anything like that, it's night and day compared working with Parcel. So I really prefer working with it, and that's pretty much the deal. Now, I want to check something here. So the way that Parcel works is that you set up Parcel to just run and watch whatever. See? I have the wrong version of Parcel installed, which is why I was having such issues with getting things to load before. So we're gonna reinstall it and see if we can get that working a little bit better. Yeah, we're actually gonna go to GitHub here, or sorry, we want to go to v2.parcel.org. Get started. Jarek web app. Yeah, we want Parcel next. So we want to do sudo npm I-g Parcel at next. And that should sort us out. Now that's the bundler that we were using. Well, what are we bundling? The front-end library that I chose to use is called HyperApp. And I'd used it before a while ago, and I really liked it. And in the intervening, 2 years, they completely changed up the API. So I had a lot of relearning to do. Let's see how this does. So if I go look at HyperApp here, it's kind of an interesting thing. Oh, there we go. It did load. Just took a minute. It's probably best to take a look at this in context. So how does HyperApp work? The first thing that you do in your Java, let's actually start with the HTML. So here's your starter HTML, and this is what you point Parcel at. I don't know if you noticed in the console, but when I started Parcel, I had it serve, and I pointed it at source/index.html. And what Parcel will do is take a look at what I'm linking to here, and say, okay, well, I need to get this and deal with it, and I need to get this, any of my links and any of my scripts, whatever I'm connecting the HTML file to, it's going to go deal with those things. So one of the things I love about that is that, I can write in my styling in Sass rather than raw CSS, and I can use the extra helpers of the Sass syntax without having to worry about it, and I just know that Parcel is going to bundle that up into proper CSS at the end of the day for me without any trouble. But for the HTML, very, very simple, right? Create the HTML, create the head where we're setting up, some mobile sizing, set up the title, and then the link to the style sheet. And then in the body, we just create this main. It could be whatever element you want, but we create a main and then we link the JavaScript source. Everything else is handled in the JavaScript. So if we look over in the JavaScript, this is where our app is actually designed and built. So we're importing H, which is the HyperApp function that creates HTML elements. Text creates text nodes, and the app is what initializes the whole thing. Now, we did Elm on this stream a long time ago. To be honest with you, nobody really watched it. But this HyperApp takes its inspiration from Elm. And the idea is that your application follows a very strict kind of update cycle, where your view, which is what is presented to the user... I'm not feeling this music at all. It's supposed to be chill code. We'll start there and see how it goes. That's a little bit more sedate. So the way that the Elm architecture works is that your view emits events or messages, and those events, those actions, will create a new version of the application state. Whatever that happens to be. And so they're very well defined, and there's only one way, right, for things to change in the state. It's through those actions. So that's kind of what we're doing here, but with the added wrinkle, which is that we're also using these functions to define our interface. So you can kind of see what's going on here with the card button. You can see I'm creating a button. It has a type of button, a class that I'm using for styling here. Value of whatever the card type is, and then on click, here's where one of those actions happens, right? Whatever fetch card is, that's what happens on click. And if we look up at fetch card, you can see that it takes an argument of whatever the application state is. Well, what is the application state? You can kind of figure it out by looking at how the app is initialized. The app is initialized with this init property that has the initial state in it. And it only has one key, which is the current card, and whatever that is, in this case, it's a string. So it starts as choose red or blue, but then fetch card is going to go do some stuff that gets us a new one. So we return the state, and then we also, in this case, we emit an action. It's like a side effect, where we're going and creating an asynchronous call to our API. Now, when that API call returns, a new action is going to get triggered with the result of that call, and that's what new card is about. So fetch card does this thing. It has this side effect of the HTTP request. Then new card gets triggered. And here we're returning whatever the state is. And then we're, creating the current card key from whatever the result from the API call is. And that's it. Once that comes in, our state is updated. Very, very, very simple. And let's see if the new version of Parcel is doing what it's supposed to do here. Hey, Panda Cat, good to see you. So let's see if I can add an exclamation point here and have this thing automatically reload. Nope. Unfortunately not. Woof. Interesting that Parcel version 2 is having such issues here. But whatever. Once this rebuilds, we should see the exclamation point. Well, it really should not have that much trouble. You can see we're getting this memory leak here. Alright, well, we're back up. And now do I have an exclamation point? No, I don't. That is strange. let's kill this again. And let's... So I've destroyed all of the dist files, all the things that Parcel builds, and we'll see if having it recreate the whole thing does a little bit better. Let's see if this is a known issue. The max listeners exceeded warning. Yeah. Definitely an issue. Well, I'm not going to read all this debug information. We're back up. It definitely rebuilt. That's interesting. Oh man, gonna go do Elon Security? That's awesome. You get a with the INE subscription, you get this one voucher. I think you get a voucher free for the PTS if they're still running that deal, and if they're not, I know for sure that your first exam voucher is 50% off. So that's great news. All right. Well, it's working well enough. I really don't know why I'm having such trouble getting it to build. Interestingly, if I do parcel build, does it have the same problem? This is what I get for developing on a Windows machine, even in WSL2. Oh, fascinating. I wonder if that's the issue. It was building stuff, but it didn't have the right entry point. Whoa. That's not supposed to have happened. Yeah, that ain't right. None of this should have just been created in that folder. So if we do parcel build distr dist, and then we say source index.html, does it build correctly? No. All right. The parcel serve works just fine. That's really interesting. What's so funny is that this was working flawlessly over on my Linux machine where I do most of my primary development. This computer is not where I do most of my programming because I don't like dealing with the Windows weirdness with all this stuff, even with WSL. And it's interesting to see the difference in how the same libraries do not perform the same way. Failed to resolve index.cab from index.h. Oh, crap. Looks like parcel build did some weird stuff to my index.html. Try that again. At any rate, the next thing that we're going to do since we have the app pretty much built, it's not that difficult. Tonight, really what we're going to spend our time doing is working in Docker to deploy this thing. So the idea is if you want to deploy your application, you have a lot of ways to do it. Wow. Parcel's giving me all sorts of trouble tonight. Everything was just fine. Try this one more time, and then I don't know. But if you haven't played with Docker, let's talk about Docker. So Docker is a technology for deploying applications in a controlled fashion. So the idea is, let's say you have a virtual machine and you don't necessarily want to spin up another one just to host a single application. Docker is great for that because what Docker does, let me see if I can bring up the diagram. What Docker does is it shares some resources amongst containers. So in a traditional virtual machine situation, right, you'd have your hypervisor like VirtualBox or VMware or Hyper-V or whatever you're using. And each VM has a whole stack of the guest OS, right, the whole kernel, all the binaries and libraries that you need, and then your application on top of it, right? So what they share is the infrastructure. Now, in a container situation, it's a little bit different. So instead of a whole guest OS for each container, what containers do is that they share most of the host's operating system. They share that kernel, and they interact with it via this thing called the container engine. And then any of the specific binaries or libraries that the application requires, the versions that it requires to do its thing, are bundled inside of the container image, or the image that starts with it. Hey, Tater. And then once you have that, then you have your application code. And then that image, when you run it, is called a container. And so the way that images work is that they're kind of these layers of diffs, right, on a file system, where you start with your base image, like Ubuntu or whatever it is, and then you add your changes as layers going forward. And it makes the storage of these things really, really easy. So that when you run a container, basically all you're doing is adding an extra layer to that set of diffs. And containers are meant to be ephemeral. So if it goes away, you still kind of have that base layer of where your code started when you built the image. And that's kind of the idea with containers. So we're going to deploy this thing via Docker. Now, if you've ever wanted to get started with Docker, it's pretty simple. You can do it on Windows if you want, but I recommend using it in Ubuntu or other flavor of Linux VM. And don't install the apt version of Docker. Go to docker.com and get the actual instructions on how to install it, because the version is going to be newer and it sets things up for you a little bit better. Once you're set, then you're able to get going creating your Docker images once everything is installed. Now, to build your own Docker images, all you have to do is create these things called Docker files. They have a specific syntax, but it's really, really simple. And we're actually going to walk through doing that with our application, assuming we can get Parcel to work. Cool. Did I mean index.js? I really didn't. I don't know what's going on with my Parcel application. It was working fine. I have index.js here. All right, we're just going to reset everything with Git and see if we can do a little bit better here. Here's hoping. All right, while this is building, which really shouldn't be taking this long, let's talk about creating a Docker file. Oh, hey, it's building though. So I don't know what was going on before. Great. So our app is working now. This is a really important. If you're going to do any web development, you're going to do it locally with an API. This next part is really important. So if I choose red team, like I see failed to fetch, that's not great. I don't want to see that. The reason I'm seeing that is because of our old pal cores, not the beer, which is horrible, but cross origin request security. So the problem is that on my local machine, I'm trying to create essentially a call to this localhost port 3000. And because it's a different port, it's considered a cross-origin request. And it doesn't really, the policy of the browser is not to allow that. Now, the good news is that there are extensions that allow you to disable that policy and allow you to make these CORS requests. It won't be a problem once we deploy the application, but for testing purposes, it's kind of a pain. So I have one of these extensions here, this allow CORS, and I'm just going to turn this on. And now, when I choose red team, now the data is coming in totally fine. Right? And I can get these going as many times as I want. So it's stupid simple, but the whole point was just to build this app, one, because I wanted to build it, and two, to demonstrate how to create one of these things and then build it together with Docker. So let's think about what we will need here. We'll need to create, let's start with the front end, because we're going to make two different Docker images. We need one that will contain the Node application, the API, okay, and one that will host the actual web application as built. And here's the extra trick. We need to serve this thing up somehow. Well, how are we going to do that? We're going to do it with the Nginx web server. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the front end code, we're going to put it inside the Nginx Docker container, okay, and have it just host that locally. But we're also going to configure it so that the Nginx server knows about the other Docker container. So we're going to network them together so that it can actually contact the API. Okay. So to do that, not only are we going to need to build a Docker file, but we're also going to need to use this thing called Docker Compose. Docker Compose is a way of defining applications of multiple Docker containers working together. So it doesn't come with Docker out of the box. You need to install it separately, but it's just a one-liner, right? If you're running on Linux, you just go ahead and run this command and then chmod it so that you can execute it. It's just a Python script. It's not that special. But let's start with the Docker file. Now, I'm gonna kill all this just for the moment because now our code is working. If you have any questions about what we're doing, don't hesitate to shout them out. Okay, and let's see here. I'm on the front end branch of my code, and let's see, git st. It's a whole bunch of stuff that's not okay. So I've got all these untracked files in the front end, and I don't want the cache there at all. So to deal with that, I'm just going to echo front end hash into my git ignore file. And now I don't have that many things that have changed. Okay. And then I really shouldn't be caring too much about what's in the dist folder. I should have ignored that earlier, but for now it's fine. So I'll just commit am recompile, and I'll, it's time stamped. It's not the best commit message ever, but it's fine. And you can see that now we're clean on our working tree, and we're ahead of the remote by a few commits. By the way, shell snobs, how am I doing this? This is the fish shell, and I'm using the Oh My Fish extension, and Bob the Fish is the theme to make my prompt look this nice and have all the Git helpers in here. Okay. Let's just confirm that Docker is running here. Sudo docker image ls to see what Docker images I have downloaded. I don't have any, which is fine. We're gonna go get some. To start, we'll start with the back end actually. Let me open. Am I seriously the only streamer that you watch that uses fish? It's so underrated. Z-shell can bite me. I don't understand. Like, I understand that fish isn't POSIX compliant, but who cares? It is so much easier to do stuff in fish. All right. So let's go, and I'm gonna check out my branch here. And we'll call it Docker. Now we're on a new branch called Docker, which has all the good stuff from front end. Dope. And VS Code, are you paying attention? Yep, VS Code is paying attention. It's changed over to the Docker branch here. Very good. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some Docker files. We'll start with the API. We're going to touch Docker file here. Now this is Node, which is actually super handy because there's a lightweight Docker image from Node that means I don't have to build everything from Ubuntu. So to check that out, we're going to go to hub.docker.com. And I'm going to quick sign in here. And you can see that I actually have built my whole like web presence with Docker Swarm. Just because I wanted to learn how to do it, and it's a little bit easier for me to do. And this won't be this may end up being part of that menagerie, but we're going to keep it separate for now. But okay, so let's go check for Node, because I know that Node has its own images here. Perfect. So here's the Node image. So we're going to pull. We're not doing anything particularly special, so we're going to just pull like the Node Alpine because it's really, really tiny. One thing with Docker images is they can get huge. 15, 14, yeah. So these are all the different tags for the Docker images that you can pull. And you'd put those after the name of the image here. So if I did Node, I'd colon and then one of these tags. Right? And actually, when I'm starting the Docker file, the first thing that I'm going to do... Oh, do I have installed? Yeah, sure. Fine. Install those things. Go for it. Notice I have a little Docker pal here. but it's not going to matter because I'm not using Docker for Windows. But so the first thing we're going to set up in our Docker file is from, and then you set up the base image. So in this case, it would be node, and we're going to do this one right here, 15.14.0. 15.14.0-alpine 3.10. Whoa, look at that. That's crazy nice. Thanks, VS Code. Does node latest work for you? It does, but I'm not certain if node latest is going to give me Alpine or not. It might. Let's see how big node latest is. So let's do So let's see, Docker image ls. 936 megs is gigantic. Let's see the difference in size. I'm going to go get the Node 15 for this one right here and see if there's a difference in size. I suspect that there is. I think that the Ubuntu image clocks in about that at this point. I think it's still under a gig, but it's about that size. Look at that difference. Yeah, that's why Alpine when you can. So we're going to do copy, and we're going to copy basically the whole file actually to app. That's more work than we need to do, but just to get started, it's fine. So what we're doing is we're copying, and by the way, each command here, think of these as layers of changes when we're creating the new Docker image. Because that's what happens. It builds the new layer, and then from there, it executes the next command. So you're kind of encapsulating one after another. But, okay, so we're going to copy the current folder, which is the API folder, right, into here. Then we're going to run. There should be npm in here. So we're going to run npm I to make sure that it has all the stuff that it needs. And then we're going to say workdir /app to set the working directory for the run to /app. And then cmd is going to be node /. Oh, and just kidding, there's one more thing that we need to do, which is we need to expose port 3000. Which is what the default is. Now, there's a lot more that we could do to configure this thing, but this is for a basic Docker file. This should be enough to get us up and running. Okay. Now from there, I've got my Docker file. To build the Docker image, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do sudo docker image build, and I have to give it a tag. So I'm going to call it, for now, I'm going to call it Hackerstrats API :latest. And otherwise it would append the latest tag by itself anyway. and then I give it the directory to build from. So it's going to go look for the Docker file and then run this thing. And we'll see how we do. Oh, I guess you know what? If we're running it, let's get rid of the run because we're copying the thing over with the node modules anyway at the moment. But we actually really should run. Error tracker ideal tree already exists. We'll see what that's about. But for now, let's just copy this thing over. Okay, so that actually built. So if we do docker sudo, am I in the? I should be in the Docker group. Oh, well, that would be why. Hang on a second. Sudo g password a. Okay, this has been driving me crazy. If you want to run Docker commands, this actually can be a security issue. But if you want to run Docker commands without sudo, you got to add yourself to the Docker group. And then you got to log out and log back in. So let me quick do this. And thanks to good old Tmux and Tmux Continuum, I don't need to worry because I've got my session exactly where I should be. Still not part of the Docker group. What is up? Weird. I think I might have to restart the Docker service. Nope, it's running. Okay. So there's hacker strats. And you'll also notice, by the way, that there's this extra Docker image. I was like, what's that about? This was the failed build. It keeps it in the event that it can reuse it on future builds because it caches that and says, okay, well, I can start from here. And like this was the last known good state. And if I can start from here and rebuild it again, then fine. I won't have to do the whole thing. But I can get rid of any Docker images that I'm not using with prune. Doesn't really get rid of anything. Okay, so now to test this thing, to see if it's actually working, what I want to do is I want to run the image as a container. So to do that, I'm going to do sudo docker container run. I'm going to give it detached mode. I'm also going to give it interactive and TTY, just in case I need it. And then give it a port forward. So I'm going to give it port 3000 on my local host to port 3000 on the guest. And then just give it... Okay. HackerStrats API. And that's it. If I do sudo docker container ls, crap, something's gone wrong. So what went wrong there? To find out, we're gonna use this ID and we're gonna do docker container logs. Let's see what went wrong. Okay. Ah, of course. The problem was that the lists weren't present. So we have a couple of ways we can solve that problem. A cheap way would be to copy red.txt to red.txt, copy blue.txt to blue.txt, like so. That's not the most elegant solution, but it'll work for now. All right, so let's rebuild the image. Ah. I can't do that with can I do add? I think add works with outside the context if copy doesn't. They work similarly. No. Okay. Well then, we're just going to have to relocate those files. Which honestly is fine. I had put them in the root of the repo for like contribution reasons, but honestly doesn't matter. And then we'll have to modify our code here for the index. And let's be good about this. Let's see, get st, get add index.js. Get rm blue.txt, get rm red.txt. Okay, now you can see everything is staged for now. And we'll get add blue.txt and red.txt and say move lists. Okay, now we're not tracking the Docker file yet, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and rebuild, see if we do better this time. All right, that looks better. Now let's see if we can run this thing. Okay, the container is running, it's up, and port 3000 is up and running. So if I curl my localhost 3000 for red, the API is up and running inside the Docker container. So our API Docker container is working perfectly. All right. Next up, we're going to have to do the Nginx Docker container. And for that, I'm going to have to remember how to write a dang Nginx config. You know what? No, I'm not. I'm gonna use a little bit of copy pasta from other Nginx configs that I've written before, but we are going to have to look up the Nginx Docker image. And this is kind of how it works with Docker run. I know it's a little small. Docker run, give it a name, some nginx, and then with V, what's cool with V is you can, at runtime, you can mount volumes within the Docker container. Now, we won't have to do that because we are going to be copying our material inside of our image. But our base image is going to be from nginx. But what's important here is our nginx. So if we were just hosting the simple static web application, this is all we would need to do. It would be really, really just like this. That's it. However, we're not, because we're also going to be using the nginx web server to redirect API calls to port 3000 internally. So for that, here you can see that we're sort of taking the nginx.conf from outside the container and putting it inside. And that's what we would have to do for that. All right. So let's get started with the basics. We'll get out of the API folder, and we will run it. Okay. Touch Dockerfile, make yourselves a new one of these. And from nginx latest, I'm going to copy dist to what is it? Was it var? User share nginx HTML. Share nginx HTML. And expose 80. Which actually you don't have to do. Notice that we don't have the expose in here. The expose actually doesn't do anything. It's nothing but an indicator to developers that that's the port you're using. That's all. It's literally all it does, because the actual port forwarding happens in the Docker container run command that you saw us do. That's what actually does the port forwarding. This doesn't do jack. Because the container is just data. It's not networking activity. So anyway. All right. Let's go build this thing. Sudo docker image build t hacker strats front end latest. The reason, presumably, it's taking so long is that it is pulling nginx down. Although it should say so. Hi, Whalebites. Welcome. Thank you for the follow. Do I recommend WSL2? I do, for most reasons. I guess what are we comparing it to? Like, I will say this. Windows subsystem for Linux is the only way that I feel comfortable using Windows. Okay? I'm a Linux guy, and my daily driver, home laptop is Linux. Almost every computer I've used for the last decade is a Linux computer. I have to use Windows now in security work because that's, where the evil is. But my secret weapon is WSL. I've used WSL 1 for a long time. WSL 2 solves some performance issues and some file system compatibility issues that WSL 1 had. It's less technically interesting because it's just a virtual machine. It's not an interesting emulation layer, but whatever. The only thing that I've had real problems with WSL 2 is networking. There are ways around it. You just have to, take some time and suss them out, because it's a virtual machine, it has its own network interface that isn't the same network interface as the rest of your Windows computer. So your WSL2 instance has a totally different IP address, it's on a totally different subnet, and so you have to figure out how you want to do your routing if you want your WSL machine to speak to anything else locally on your Windows device. But other than that, yes, I absolutely recommend WSL2. This is taking too long. Of course. That's what we're here to do. Especially, I should say, especially Wednesday nights. I think of Wednesday nights as like office hours. It's, I'm doing what I'm doing, but it's, definitely open for Q&A. It's always open for Q&A, but that's specifically what I was hoping to do with Wednesday nights. So for web dev, it's better. If you're comfortable on Linux, I would say Linux is really kind of unquestionably the most comfortable web development environment, even if you're doing it in a VM, because if it's web dev, it's not like super compute heavy, right? If you're not comfortable on Linux, then Mac. The reason I say that is because so much of the tooling for web development is command line and Unix command line oriented. And there are always kind of like, there are workarounds to get it to run on like PowerShell or Linux or like bash.exe or whatever before we had WSL, but it's just not as smooth an experience. So if you do have a Windows machine, WSL is the next best thing. All right. Yes. All right, we have ourselves Nginx. Of course. Try to build this thing again. Curious why this is taking so long. It looks like Docker's doing something. How big is dist? It's very tiny. I want the opposite of quiet. I want verbose. Oh, there we go. Okay, here is a WSL2 problem that other people have had, and I haven't really experienced it yet, but we're seeing it live, which is that WSL2 actually has, for whatever reason, sometimes a massive I/O slowdown when talking to the host system. I do not know why. I do not know why. But for whatever reason, sometimes the I/O pipes, because this is on part of the file system that's mounted by Windows rather than within the WSL2 environment, it just does not want to play ball. That may have been part of the problem with the parcel that we were having earlier, that it's on. Interesting. Just as an experiment, I'm going to do something. We'll see if it works. This itself may be slow because of the I/O problem. I'm going to look this up to see if there's a fix for it. Literally the problem that we're having. Incredible. So it's still open. This problem really still exists for everybody. Okay, well the CP worked. Now let's see if this does better. It already feels snappier. That could just be my head. Yo! Look at that. Look at that difference. So, words to the wise, and apparently I'm not so wise, but words to the wise, if you're going to run WSL2 and you intend to do Git stuff or this kind of thing, know that if you're running under the Windows file system, like if you're working in a folder that really was designed for Windows, your I/O is going to be crazy slow sometimes. But if you move it over into your home, like let me show you where I am now. See how I'm in the /home? Before, I was, let me show you where I am down here. Look how, you can see the lag. That's insane. But /mnt, I'm in the E drive, which is where I have all, it's an external drive I have all my junk on. But look at that. It's so much slower in that location. So Whalebites, if you only need Windows for Office, for real, you're not going to do any gaming, you're not going to do any Photoshop, look, you're already paying for Office 365, right? Can you get away with using it online? If so, go full Linux. And if not, you know, you've paid for a Windows license, consider virtualizing that and having Linux as your daily driver. This is a little bit of me being an evangelist, but I swear you will learn if you haven't done, you know, a whole lot of Linux. Maybe you have, I don't know. But if you haven't, I swear you will learn so much about how just technology in general, but certainly how operating systems work by forcing yourself to use Linux as a daily driver. It is the one, like the single thing that I can credit with like my success in IT over my career is forcing myself to use Linux as a daily driver, because when stuff breaks, and it does, not that often these days, it used to be a lot more finicky, you got to figure out how to fix it. Now, you know, to be fair, I would probably have a whole lot less patience for that now. That was something I had time for when I was, you know, 24. But so, can you install WSL2 in another partition? Maybe. Here's the thing about the WSL2 application. It's an AppX package from the App Store, and so I think its install location is pretty much like wherever Windows puts those things. And it's user specific too, I know, because I've run into situations where I've like installed WSL as a privileged user, and then on my regular user account I don't have access to it. So I don't know how much you can configure where AppXs are installed. Maybe you can, but definitely not if you're just clicking install from the Windows Store. It'll do whatever it's, you know, configured to do. What I could do, right, is I could probably do some hacky stuff where, like, I create like an SMB mount and mount my Windows partition inside the Linux partition, and I wonder if that would actually have better performance. I don't know, because then I'd be using the SMB driver rather than the NTFS driver. That would be very funny. Okay, we have the image though, so let's go ahead and run this thing. So sudo docker container run, we'll call it nginx, and detach it. That's detached mode, otherwise we won't get our console back. And we'll say port 8000 to port 80, and hacker strats front end. Do docker container ls. Okay, so our nginx is working. So let's go ahead and visit localhost 8000. And there's our app running in a Docker container. Now, I'm trying to think this through. I'm pretty sure that this will still not work. Oh, snap. No, it does work. Awesome. Yeah, oh, right. Of course it will, because it's localhost relative to my browser, not to the Nginx web server. So we have... That's cool. We that actually makes this a lot easier than I thought it was gonna be. So we have this thing running inside of 2 Docker containers, which is neat, but from a deployment standpoint, not the easiest, right? I don't necessarily want to do that. So instead, what I could do is I could use something called Docker Compose, which we touched on. We're going to have to... The Docker Compose file is a YAML file, so it's a slightly different syntax than what we've been doing with the Docker files. Compose file reference. Can I just... Wait, what? Okay, here we go. This is how we build... This is how we build applications with Docker Compose. So to start, we're going to create a new file. So now I have a Docker branch that I'm developing here. Cool. And yeah, I guess I'll just live there for the moment. If I had known, I'm so curious if we'd have the same parcel problem, or if that would work out again. Anyway, okay, so let's, yeah, we're gonna touch Docker Compose.yml. You could call it whatever you want, but by default, it's Docker Compose.yaml. And of course, my editor has no idea where I am anymore because I'm not actually in that folder. So file, there's like a specific way that you're supposed to open close folder. There's like a specific way you're supposed to open WSL folders in VS Code, and I can't remember how you do it. Oh, you just launched a new instance of VS Code by connected to WSL by opening a WSL terminal. Oh, can I also do it from the palette? Yeah, there we go. Open folder in WSL. See that? There's hacker strategies. There we go. And you can see here that I'm using WSL Ubuntu. There we go. See, Windows was the problem. It's always the problem. Never forget that. Okay, so let's follow our syntax here. Version 3.9. Services. Call service1 nginx. and image is like so. Now, notice that you can also actually set up builds so that if you don't have the, and actually we can do this here. So if you don't have the images locally, which why would somebody else with this have the images? You can, instead of specifying an image in your Docker Compose, you can specify so image is one option, but another option is you can set up the build so that you can actually build it right from the Docker Compose. And let's actually do that rather than kind of calling our shot here with the, so we'll say build, and then the context is going to be front end from where we are. Is that right? Yeah, like that. We don't have to specify our Docker file because it's the default name. And the target labels. That's what I wanted. Nope, no, it's not. Yeah, I don't need the target because I'm not adding that. So that's kind of it. And then that's it for the build of Nginx, but then I have to add some other stuff. Not deploy right now because we're not replicating anything. We're not using Docker Swarm. But we will have to set up ports. So the port forwarding is really, really simple. That's the easy way to do it. Okay. That's one service, right? Now the other service is the API. So the build here, very similarly, is going to be context API. And the ports are going to be like so, 3000 to 3000. And that, I think, should do it, actually. So what we're going to do from here is we're going to take our current... Nope, still got to do it with sudo. Sudo container, docker container ls. We're going to kill those. So sudo docker container stop nginx and boring hopper. If you don't give a Docker container a name, it creates its own that's an adjective and a scientist. I swear, that's what it is. It's an adjective and it's a scientist, whatever the scientist is. Okay. Now we'll do Docker compose, and let's run the help just so we can see the options. So pretty simple, but No, I thought there was a thing to test the compose file. No? Oh, config. Yep, that's it. So if we use docker compose config, it tells us if we have any errors, and in case we do. Services API contains an invalid type. It should be an array. That's correct. So that's just my YAML being bad. It should be like that. Let's try that again. Okay, when we get the whole output back, that means that the config file is good. And then we just do docker compose up. Now, I think we'll probably need to run this as sudo. Yeah. Do docker compose up. Notice that it's building the images from scratch. What did I forget to do? I forgot to run it with the D for detach. Okay, so look, it's starting the services, which have already been built, so it doesn't have to rebuild it again on this system. And if I do sudo docker container ls, you'll notice that I have my 2 containers up and running. And if everything's gone according to plan, on port 8000, I should have my app, and I do. And the API should be working, and it is. And what's cool about this is now my application is containerized, right? So all I have to do to deploy this thing is on any virtual machine with Docker running, all I have to do is git clone the Git repository, right? And then just run docker compose up and I'm good to go. And I have the application running. Now there's more that you would probably need to do with Nginx. You might want to configure the SSL certificate and things like that. But for a baseline, that's kind of all there is to it. And now you have the next stage for a DevOps pipeline might be to set up your Docker account so that it is connected to your GitHub account, so that whenever there's a change in your Git repository, new Docker images are built from your repo automatically. So you never have to worry about creating new images. They're always available for you. That's an option as well. But all right. Unbelievably, for the first time ever, we're done something like on time. So I think that's going to do it for tonight. And I'll be back on Saturday doing some blue teamy stuff. But also on Saturday, I promised that I would finish the swag shop, and I will. I actually got a shell like minutes after finishing the broadcast last night, and it was so annoying. But for now, I think that's going to do it. Let's see if there's anybody else online right now that we can send y'all to. Yeah. Slyborg Center's on, so we'll send you to her. Whatever she's doing. All right, friends. Have a good night. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. Happy hacking. I'll see you on Saturday.
Yeah, okay, see, like,